You're listening to the Unlocking Africa podcast.
I really wanted to be part of changing Africa's relationship with energy, fossil fuels in particular, and to also tell a different narrative. It is within the corporate environment that I gained a strong understanding of the struggles that women face in the workplace. We're Africa's leading private membership network that promotes women talent as board members, advisors, as well as investment committee members and executives. Ultimately, what we are trying to say is creating a diverse, inclusive culture requires embracing diversity in its full form.
Stay tuned as we bring you inspiring people who are unlocking Africa's economic potential. You're listening to the Unlocking Africa podcast with your host, Tessa Adamu.
Welcome to the Unlocking Africa podcast, where we find amazing people who are doing amazing things to unlock Africa's economic potential. Today, we have Marcia Ashong, who is CEO of TheBoardroom Africa, which is the largest regional network of women executives with the mission to accelerate the representation of women on boards and to break down barriers to help organizations realize the benefits of increased diversity on boards. Welcome to the podcast, Marcia. How are you?
Thank you so much, Tessa. I'm great. Great to be here. Thank you.
Fantastic. It's great to have you on the podcast as well. How's your day?
So far, so great. It's been a busy week. We are gearing up for a few launches, but it's been a fruitful one as well. So can't wait to get into the Easter holidays.
Brilliant. Great to hear that. I'm not sure if you've listened to the podcast before, but I usually like to start from the beginning. So I was hoping you could please introduce yourself and tell us a bit more about Marcia Ashong.
Yes, absolutely. Well, as you said, my name is Marcia Ashong, and I'm currently the founder and CEO of Boardroom Africa. So who am I? I believe I'm largely a product of my environment because I've been shaped by it, but also in spite of it. My career has taken many pivots. And when I look back, I realized that everything that I did before was in preparation for what I'm doing now. I've always had a strong disposition towards activism and began my career in international human rights. As a young lawyer, I then transitioned into the energy sector. And I did that because I really wanted to be part of changing Africa's relationship with energy and fossil fuels in particular, and to also tell a different narrative about our natural resource wealth. I worked in policy and advisory and then transitioned to corporate and worked with multiple multinationals where I found myself quickly rising up the ranks. But I'll say that it was also within this environment that my identity as a Black African woman became more salient as I navigated these global institutions. But I also had the privilege of building a career in an extremely fast-paced and also in some cases cutthroat environment. I worked across the globe and lived on different continents while I did so. But also I'd say that it is within the corporate environment that I gained a strong understanding of the struggles that women face in the workplace. And so essentially I saw two paths available to me. I could continue the corporate rat race or be part of the change that was needed. So I opted for the latter. So now my mission is to be a catalyst for change and particularly for African women, build platforms and systems where their voices, perspectives, and leadership capacities are seen and celebrated.
Fantastic. Awesome. So you've given us quite a nice overview in terms of who you are. You mentioned that you're a product of your environment. Your career has taken many pivots, which has led you to becoming the CEO of TheBoardroom Africa. Tell us a bit more about the organization in terms of the work that you're currently doing in Africa.
Yes, absolutely. We're Africa's leading private membership network that promotes women talent as board members, advisors, as well as investment committee members and executives. We do so by working along a set of strategic pillars and with a group of stakeholders. Our strategic pillars are network, access, and development. Under our network arm, we've built a leading community of women executives and leaders across the continent and the diaspora, representing more than 2,500 women across more than 65 countries and sectors. Through our access pillar, we work with companies and organizations, both large and small, including development finance institutions and private equity investors, to support their efforts to build diverse leadership teams. And finally, but certainly not least, our executive development arm is where we support women leaders by giving them access to world-class executive programs. And I think we do that because we recognize that while it's important to place women in these leadership spaces, we have to recognize that these spaces are also still very heavily male-dominated. And for as many women to succeed, we need to give them the tools and resources to thrive. So our ultimate goal really is to create societies where women are leading side by side with men, and that we transform the presence and influence of African women on the global stage.
Fantastic. So you mentioned that the Boardroom Africa is the leading network of women executives amongst a range of other activities that the organization is involved in to accelerate the representation of women in African boards. So this work takes a lot of coordination, a lot of willpower. So I was hoping you could tell us who are the people behind the Boardroom Africa? Who else makes up part of your team?
Yes, I'm very happy to do that. We have an incredible team of 15 people spread across Accra, Nairobi, London, Lagos, Kigali, New York, you name it, with talents ranging from human resource to operational management, gender diversity, gender specialists, communications, partnerships, campaign management, you name it. It's a really dynamic and truly Pan-African team, and that's purposeful because we're serving a Pan-African audience. We also have institutional partners, including DFIs like British International Investment, which was formerly CDC Group, which is the world's largest bilateral development investor in Africa, and the IFC, which invests over 10 billion annually across Africa and more. So these relationships to us are really critical to our success because we strongly believe that investors provide a great pathway to achieving board diversity across these portfolios. Including our investors also are some of our donors like Blue Haven Initiative, who have come in to really support us in growing this community, but also growing the talent.
So you detailed how you have a fantastic team spread across the globe. So I was wondering, does that reflect in terms of how many countries do you currently operate in at present?
Yeah, so that does definitely reflect that because we've been really purposeful about making this a truly Pan-African organization. And through technology, we've been able to create that. So our network literally spans the continent in terms of where the representation of women in our network. And when I say Pan-African, I literally mean North, South, East, West, and even the islands. And our ability to have teams across the continent, but also across the globe, helps us to attract these talents.
Awesome. So you mentioned how your team reflects the fact that you are a Pan-African organization, which obviously means that you have a great understanding or awareness of what is happening across the continent. I know this is a very broad question, but what is the current state of the representation of women in boardroom positions in Africa?
It's a very good question. Recent data actually indicates that Africa outperforms the global average of women directors in a boardroom. However, I like to take a deeper look whenever I see this type of data. And when you take a deeper look, only a small number of African countries have actually led this progress. And that's quite telling. Countries most notable like South Africa, Kenya, Nigeria. And also the sample size remains relatively small with only about 97 countries analyzed. our own research indicates that women still disproportionately occupy leadership positions and usually don't have a clear path to the board. Since 2017, we've mapped the composition of Africa's listed boards in 11 African countries to assess progress on gender diversity across the region. The index tracks roughly 11 countries' listed boards. It identifies all board seats filled by women. It also monitors the number of women in executive positions. And what we've seen is the average representation of the highest being roughly 30%, with countries leading like Uganda, South Africa, and the lowest being 17%, with countries like Egypt and Cote d'Ivoire and Tanzania. But because we've been doing this for the past few years, we've also noticed the trend upwards. In countries like Egypt, when we started, it was in the 9% range, and that number is inching up. So there is progress. But honestly, I believe that there's still a lot of work to do. I'm not necessarily encouraged by reports showing that Africa leads the global average because, as I said, the data skews towards those countries that are leading the way. And we have to do a lot more work to ensure that our boards and leadership teams across Africa are reflective of our societies.
Thank you for sharing that, Marcia. So from what you've said, there's still a long way to go with regards to women in leadership roles or positions in Africa. So what are the biggest challenges that women face when it comes to securing these leadership positions within the continent?
Another great question. Honestly, a lot of it is to do with access and networks. Most board opportunities occur as a result of your network, who you know, how you know, and so on. We know the spiel.
Yes.
And most networks are closed. And in a world where men hold the vast majority of leadership roles, these networks are also very heavily male dominated, and they tend to replicate themselves. It's human nature. We gravitate more towards those that look and sound like us. And our networks are also representative of that. And most of us don't make a conscious effort to change it. So that's essentially what's happening in leadership spaces and in boardrooms. They're predominantly male. And whenever opportunities arise, they are shared within those predominantly male networks. And this exacerbates the systems barriers already set up against women. Black and African women are particularly at the short end of this dynamic. We're often operating at the intersections of race and patriarchy. And you'll be surprised how many times we found some boards in Africa that have even more non-African women than they do have African women.
Interesting.
Yeah, and really the way we're addressing this is in a multitude of ways. When we talk to board leaders and executives and ask them why they don't have enough women represented, they often cite not being able to find them. And obviously, initially, I used to roll my eyes when I heard this because the talent does exist. But in the 7 years that I've been doing this work, I do realize that this is exactly the effect of closed networks. And it also creates blind spots and what I dub network deficits. So we recognize this is real, and our network really exists to break open these barriers by bringing women into the spheres of influence and opportunity. We pride ourselves in finding talented women in areas and regions, but nobody else is looking, and also consciously avoid going to the same women for same opportunities. We also work with women to expand their influence and position themselves as the best candidates. Board opportunities need to be approached really purposefully, and we need to demystify what it means to be serving on board. So the right positioning to us is critical for success. And so we help women determine what may be the right fit based on their backgrounds and experiences, who they should be talking to, how to find the right people and the right ecosystems, etc.
Fantastic. Thank you for this. So you mentioned that a big challenge is gaining access to closed networks, which tend to be male dominated. This might seem like quite an obvious question, but what is the importance of having women or a more diverse representation of people at boardroom level?
Yeah, it's an obvious question. It's also not an obvious answer. You might be surprised.
Yes.
This is a very important question, and one that in my view, is not addressed in a way that gets to the heart of why this issue is so vitally important. So I'm a lawyer and come from a human rights background. So many of us will approach this issue merely from a rights-based standpoint. And that's important. Women must be equal participants and we must have equal voices because these issues affect us and in some cases even more, right? But I truly believe that in order to really shift the narrative, we must start to detail the negative results when women aren't equally represented in these spaces.
Yes.
Boardrooms are designed to be problem-solving spaces. They are spaces where blind spots have to be eliminated at all costs because not being able to identify the risk and determine how to manage them in the context of an operating environment can really spell disaster. And so diverse teams have been well researched and well documented to provide a guard against some of these pitfalls. Diverse perspectives open the aperture of opportunity to make it easier to spot challenges and opportunities as they arise. They are more innovative and create space to process information more carefully. And this all leads to better decision making. And it's therefore not a surprise that if you have a group of people that generate the dividends of diversity and create a thriving and healthy environment for inputs and discussions, that these will lead to more thriving organizations that also impact the bottom line. It's really not rocket science, but obviously we're not telling the story right.
Thank you for that, Marcia. So how do you go about working with companies to help them understand the importance and also the benefits of gender diversity on boards?
So firstly, we see companies and organizations as some of the key stakeholders that we engage in finding solutions. We also have to be realistic and understand that we meet each company where it's at.
Yes.
If a company understands that they are not diverse and have done the analysis to understand where their gaps are, we support them by giving them access to our talent marketplace. And we offer a streamlined service tailored to the company and wherever they are in their recruitment journey. We also have an advocacy arm that's targeted at industry. Our board diversity charter, for instance, which we launched a few years ago with Alithia Capital, is a call to action for companies to make meaningful steps towards embedding diversity as a key performance indicator led by the board. And the Charter's Toolkit, which accompanies it, is a practical guide for organizations and a step-by-step guide and resource for chairs, nomination committees, CEOs, who are really looking to make an effective and lasting transition for diverse boards. So there are a myriad of ways we support, but at the heart of it is recognizing that you take each company where it's at.
Fantastic. So you've mentioned the strategies and actions that you put in place to support companies with understanding the importance and benefits of gender diversity on boards. So how easy is it to measure the impact that you're making? Is it more about the numbers or does it go deeper than that?
What we've done is built a strong theory of change model that outlines our assumptions on how the core program and activities lead to positive change and impact at the individual, organization, and societal level. So we capture our performance along those three areas. It's important to realize that this issue is multifaceted, and just saying, well, let's get women and place them on boards is not enough, which is why our solution is three-pronged and it sits along those three strategic pillars that I mentioned earlier. We measure our impact through the lens that, and it's reflected mostly in the lives and the systems that we're changing. To date, we placed roughly 100 women on boards, executive teams, and investment committees. We've graduated over 300 women leaders through our executive programs on board effectiveness, ESG, to name a few. And our growing network of women leaders has reinforced our resolve to continue to provide a rich environment for these women to thrive. I know that we're changing the landscape, but I think what makes us realize even more that we are changing the landscape is through the anecdotal stories and the narratives we hear from the women themselves. Because there's one thing to have the data to back it up, but there's quite another to hear it directly from them. And that really, really motivates us.
You've detailed what you're doing within your organization specifically, and you've placed over 100 women on boards and how you provide a positive environment for women to thrive. So I guess looking outside of what you do in terms of the general business environment, what steps do you think need to be taken in order to create a more diverse and inclusive business environment for all?
When we advise companies, we often tell them to over communicate around the expectations of team members and setting clear and measurable goals to meet diversity targets. It's important to be intentional about creating psychological safety nets across teams so team members feel comfortable to raise red flags and concerns when they see them. Keeping teams motivated and engaged by publicly celebrating successes as a unit has also been something we double down in our own environment. Also, understanding different working cultures and personalities is important. So outside of the basic requirements for diversity, which are gender, age, ethnicity, you name it, it's important to also celebrate different types of personalities and different cultures. Sometimes we tend to only gravitate towards those that are the loudest and the most vocal, but recognizing that some gems are hiding in very quiet personalities. And so realizing that and celebrating that is also critical. So I think ultimately what we are trying to say is that creating a diverse culture, an inclusive culture, requires embracing diversity in its full form.
Fantastic. Thank you. So we've discussed what you do, the Boardroom Africa, and how you manage to work with companies to make them understand the positive impact having a diverse board can have. But sometimes things can be outside of our control, such as COVID-19, and we are currently seeing a global economic downturn. So I was wondering what impact those two factors had on how you operate within the Boardroom Africa.
We've all had an opportunity, I think, to experiment and re-explore how we gather and do business in this new world order. I believe every business in this era should be imagining or already implementing ways that they can utilize technology as an enabler in the ways they work. I'm not suggesting that every initiative becomes a tech initiative, but what I am suggesting is utilizing technology as an enabler. For example, we were a remote team even before COVID, and we've had a very strong mix of online and offline solutions. But given restrictions on gathering due to COVID, we were able to pivot quite fast and without much disruption to our operations. And we placed a greater emphasis on our online offerings. We experimented to find formats that best suit our members' needs. So being agile and being able to kind of move quickly as things change is critical. Since then, we've expanded our webinar series. We enhanced our existing members platform to create a more of an online space for people to gather. We expanded our masterclasses and our programs, online program offerings. We expanded our support for members with skills development to provide an omni-channel approach to community engagement.
I mean, the work that you do is challenging even prior to COVID-19 and the current economic downturn. So what motivates and inspires you to continue this work every day? And what impact do you hope to make with your efforts through the Boardroom Africa?
Wow, it's a great question. I believe I'm motivated by the lives that we're changing, honestly. Through that, changing those systems that have so long worked against women. I'm energized daily when women in our network say how access to an opportunity changed their careers or their regional influence or an executive program has reinforced their resolve in the boardroom. We know that by 2050, we're told that a quarter of the world's population will be African, which means that 1 in every 8 women will be an African woman. And I sincerely hope by the work we're doing that we're preparing the African woman for that future where our presence and influence at the global stage will be both seen and felt and celebrated.
Thank you for that, Marcia. You touched on quite a key point there in terms of preparing the African woman. So, what advice would you give for women who are aspiring to break into boardroom positions, and what steps can they take to position themselves for success?
Well, first of all, I'd say it's important that you start understanding the board landscape and how you fit into that. Determine what the ecosystem is for the boards you wish to join and where your skills and experiences align. Like any search process, choosing the right job or even choosing the right university, it has to be an intentional process. Too many of us have unrealistic expectations of what boards are or what a board position even entails. And often we see it simply as just a status symbol. Having a board role is a nice thing to have. And I think this is a dangerous approach. A board role comes with its own complexities and expectations and responsibilities that are often legal in nature. And like any environment, you have to be prepared to understand how to navigate those complexities, but also the various personalities and stakeholders that are at the table with you. So as well as being prepared with understanding what your role is as a director, you have to do your analysis as to where you want to focus and which types of companies and industries you can best serve. Boards are typically looking for individuals that have seen the scale or growth that their companies are trying to get to. For instance, if you are a $1 million company trying to get to $10 million, they likely want people on that board who've seen that type of growth that they're trying to get to, either as executives or in other capacities. So the question is, how do you demonstrate that scale that this board is looking for or that expertise? Finally, I'll also say that expanding your network to access these opportunities is critical. Once you know how you fit in, who do you talk to get to where you want to go? Maybe you want to join the board of an insurance company or a startup. What makes sense? Find yourself in the right ecosystem. Do you need to speak with venture funds, for instance, especially if you're trying to sit on boards of early stage companies? Find out about the companies that are getting funded and then which funds are backing them. What tools or expertise are they needing, and so on. It's about relationships and building them and being purposeful and being strategic, stepping out of your comfort zone, and also fundamentally breaking away from your own closed networks.
Thank you for sharing those amazing pieces of insight. So can you share any upcoming initiatives or plans for the Boardroom Africa that listeners should be aware of?
Yes, we have a lot in store coming up this year. For the first time since COVID, we're reintroducing our in-person programs with our annual gathering in Egypt later this year and our director certificate program called Open Doors being held in Cape Town also later this year. After successfully launching our ESG certificate with a graduating first cohort, we're getting overwhelming demand to do another. So we just launched our plans to host another cohort in August of this year. We're also expanding our membership offerings through more leadership coaching and other professional and personal support, and are partnering with some really exciting organizations in and outside of Africa to deliver these. So I say stay tuned for more.
Fantastic. So it's clear that you're busy and have a lot of activities in the pipeline. So outside of the Boardroom Africa, what other great initiatives are there to support women to gain a seat at the boardroom table?
There are many initiatives focused on supporting women more broadly. We're lucky to count many of them, some of which are mostly national focused organizations. We're lucky to count them as partners. However, to my knowledge, there are no initiatives that are focused on the boardroom specifically that are also Pan-African in nature. So we're unique in that sense. the way that women arrive at the boardroom and the expectations of them there are different from an executive role. That's why we see the value of maintaining our focus there in tackling the barriers and expanding opportunities that will shift the boardroom scenario. But we're looking to building even more initiatives around this solution because we've built a truly incredible a network and we hope to expand that over time. But these national organizations that are professional women groups are really our partners and they equally help us thrive.
So we've discussed many challenges and some of the ways to navigate those challenges. So are there any positive trends or activities that you're seeing on the continent with regards to women being represented at boardroom level?
Yes, I know that we are specifically demystifying what it means to be a director. So we're seeing more women that are seeing a career as company directors. And that's really a refreshing outlook and a refreshing standpoint to see it from our perspective. Prior to us existing, every time I spoke to a woman about the potential to sit on boards, it almost seemed unrealistic to them. We're also seeing more women that are preparing themselves for the boardroom. As such, in many ways, they're building strong governance portfolios that transform the companies that they serve on. More companies are seeing the value of diverse boards and are also on the pathway to building more diverse ecosystems. And then finally, at the national level, we're seeing more and more countries set up legislation with quotas, especially for those regulated sectors, with quotas on how many women should serve on those boards. And immediately after these legislations are established and come into force, we're seeing a trend upwards of the number of women represented in those spaces. So there's definitely a positive trajectory. I think what we need, however, is to find more and more organizations that really see the true value of this. And that's a lot more work to be done there.
Okay. Some very positive trends, which is great to hear. So moving forward from current trends and looking at the future, how do you see the role of women in leadership in Africa evolving in the next 5 years? And I guess, what role do you think the Boardroom Africa will play in this?
Women will definitely take up the space that they rightly belong in.
Yes.
Without a doubt. And the more women do so, the more we can build strong companies and institutions that scale and grow sustainably. I strongly believe that Africa will not realize its full potential until women are equal at the helm of leadership.
Yes.
Women, for me, are the key to unlocking Africa's potential. And I hope that the Boardroom Africa is center stage in this inevitable change.
I hope so too. So looking closer to home, where do you see yourself and the Boardroom Africa in 5 years' time?
Whoa, in 5 years, we're building a foundation of leadership, starting in a boardroom, but I'm hoping that won't end there. Like I said, we've built something quite incredible, and we see ourselves as an umbrella where other initiatives will balloon from and that are designed really to support women at all stages in their careers. So watch this space. There's a lot more to come.
Brilliant. I look forward to seeing how everything unfolds and what you achieve in the next 5 years. So I guess if we look further past that, what kind of legacy or footprint do you hope to leave in Africa?
I hope I will have helped to create a world where African women are some of the world's most sought after leaders and experts.
Brilliant.
And I know Africa's best days are yet to come. And when it does, women will be there leading with men side by side.
Brilliant. Thank you for sharing that, Marcia.
Quote of the week.
As people, we often have quotes, mantras, African proverbs, or affirmations that keep us going when times are challenging or when times are good. Do you have one that you can share with us today?
I do.
Brilliant.
I think in so many ways, my journey and the work we do at the Boardroom Africa epitomizes this old African adage that if you want to go fast, you go alone. But if you want to go far, you go together.
Yes.
And it's such a meaningful saying that indeed we all, men and women, must walk together. Nobody can be left alone and nobody can be left aside. And before we get there, we as women must also join forces to support each other to break those barriers. So that saying actually really rings true to everything we do at the Boardroom Africa.
I agree 100%. Interestingly, we've come to the end of the conversation, and I was hoping before you leave us, you might have some closing remarks or final calls to action for people who are interested in the work that you're doing.
Yes. One thing I will say is, we're a broad network. If you're not a woman, join us still, because we need men also in this agenda with us to continue to grow. We need supporters. We need partners. We need industry experts to come along this journey with us. So I'd say if you want to partner with us, get in touch, learn about how you can be influential in this space, and also lead within your organizations, lead this diversity agenda. But thank you so much for giving me this platform, Tessa, and looking forward to hearing from your audience. Anybody who may have questions can reach out to me directly through LinkedIn.
Brilliant. And I'll also have your details on the show notes of the podcast so people can reach out directly once they've listened to the podcast. Thank you for joining us today. It's been an extremely amazing conversation, one that I've looked forward to and thoroughly enjoyed. It's clear that you're offering something that is much needed, not just on the continent, but globally as well. You're doing it for the right reasons. You have massive passion and a great team beside you doing some amazing things. So
thank you.
Amazing. Thank you for joining me on the podcast today.
It was such a pleasure. Thank you for the opportunity, Tessa.
Brilliant. And we will speak soon.
Likewise. Take care.
Take care. Thank you to everyone who has listened and stayed tuned to the podcast. If you've enjoyed this episode, please subscribe, share, or tell a friend about it. You can also rate, review us in Apple Podcasts or wherever you download your podcast. Thank you, and see you next week for the Unlocking Africa podcast.